Phase 2 of Season of Discovery is on the horizon, and if like me you've leveled multiple characters during Phase 1, you might be struggling with what one's going to actually be your main in Phase 2, or which one are you going to level to 40 first. So I'm going to do my very best to get through every class before launch, although time is starting to run out, but hopefully I can get them all done in time. But in this video we're going to look at whether the Mage will be right for you in Phase 2. So first of all, we're going to look at what new abilities you're going to gain by level 40. These will be ones that you visit the trainer to get. We're also going to look at key talents that you're going to have access to. We're not going to look through every single talent, just the big ones. We're also going to look at all the belt and boot runes that are going to become available, because even though it's only data mined information, we know the belt and boots are definitely runes that we're going to have access to because Blizzard showed us some of them themselves. So we'll have a look at those, and we'll ignore the head and bracer runes that were data mined because we just don't know if they're legit. I mean, they're probably legit, but just not for Phase 2. We'll also have a look at if any of the data mined items that have been found are going to be worth getting excited for if you're a mage. This could be from Gnomeregon or PvP or even professions. And then I'll just give you my thoughts on how I think it's going to perform, and ultimately, is it going to be right for you? Now, the mage is actually a really interesting one, and I'm going to have a second video about the mage go out shortly after this one, because while Arcane is meant to be the healer spec, I actually think that's going to change in Phase 2. I'm not going to go too deep into that in this video, but if you want to see that, be sure to subscribe. And while you're down there, chuck a like on the video as well. Cheers. Now, first of all, when it comes to new abilities, what the Mage has really struggled with so far in Phase 1 has been mana. It hasn't really mattered what spec you are, they've all suffered pretty much the same. If you haven't got Evocate and the fight lasts too long, then you're just going to be wanding by the end of it. Now, a lot of this is going to be alleviated from new abilities, because at level 28 you're going to unlock your mana gem, which by the time you reach level 40 you're going to actually have the second rank, which is Conjure Mana Jade, and you'll be able to use this to instantly restore 550 to 650 mana. Now, not only this, when we're talking about mana issues, Mage Armor also becomes available at level 34, where it increases your resistance to all magic by 5 and allows 30% of your mana regen to continue while casting. Now, in a raiding environment, there's not really going to be another armor worth using, so getting that extra mana regen and being able to get your Mana Jade is just going to make a big difference to the longevity of your mana bar. A big one for PvP in particular is going to become available at 26, so just after getting your first level, and that's Cone of Cold. Now, I'm sure you're all familiar with what Cone of Cold does, and it's not only going to be useful for PvP. Don't get me wrong, it is going to be amazing in PvP, but also for AoE grinding if you decide to AoE grind as Frost. Obviously, Cone of Cold to be able to get some distance is amazing, and the damage ain't bad either. And eventually, when you hit level 40, you're also going to unlock your first portals, which you'll be able to stand and sell. Yeah, that's about it really. In all seriousness, having portals is obviously mega useful, and you're going to get access to them in Phase 2. Now, quite honestly, outside of new ranks of spells like Flame Strike, Fireball, Blizzard, and all of the good stuff that you're used to, there's not really anything new you're going to actually get from the trainer that we haven't already spoke about. But when we look at the talents, that's going to be where it starts to get really interesting. So everybody by level 40 will have access to that very final ability in your talent trees. Now, quite honestly, when you go through Arcane, other than the fact that you're going to get 10% extra mana, you're going to get Presence of Mind, where you can just get off a instant cast Fireball or Pyroblast or anything like that on a 3-minute cooldown, as long as its cast time is less than 10 seconds. And you're going to get Arcane Power, which when activated, your spells deal 30% more damage while costing 30% more mana. Now, I've got to be honest with you, the Arcane tree is pretty boring. Yes, you're going to get that extra mana, you're going to get Arcane Power, which for healers is going to be amazing, but like I said, I actually think we could be seeing mages do something slightly different than being Arcane in the next phase. As for fire mages, you're going to get access to both points in Master of Elements, which is really going to help with your mana. Also being able to get all 3 points in Improved Scorch, so the enemy targets start taking more damage from fire spells when you get it stacked. Generally getting more crit from things like Critical Mass on your way down, and even just increasing your fire damage spells with things like Firepower. And you'll eventually get Combustion, which is a nice 3-minute cooldown, because each time one of your spells hit while it's active, it's going to increase the critical strike chance of your fire spells by 10%, and it will last until you've got 3 critical strikes with fire spells. The reason it's really nice is because it's going to synergize with a rune, which you probably already know what rune that's going to be, but we'll get to it in a minute. Frost really comes online in Phase 2, because all of the really useful spells in Frost don't come until much later in the talent tree. You'll now be able to get all 3 points in Piercing Ice, which increases the damage of your Frost spells by 6%, And the most important one is Shatter, where this increases the critical strike chance of all of your spells against frozen targets by 50%. So with things like Fingers of Frost, which is a rune you've already got access to, combined with Ice Lance having all that increased critical strike chance, obviously it just starts absolutely slapping. You'll also be able to get access to Winter's Chill, which basically, once you've got it stacked on the target, is going to increase your Frost spell critical strike chance by 10%. But the two big ones, especially for PvP and soloing content, is going to be Ice Block and Ice Barrier. Now, both of these are absolutely amazing, and I think Frost will be shaping up as a pretty good all-round spec. What I mean by this is a spec that you'll be able to solo content with, you'll be able to be a beast in PvP, so when you're doing the STV event, you'll be able to heal with it. Yes, you will, and we might touch on that very shortly. And I think with access to all of the deeper talents, combined with the new spells that you're going to get from runes and the new spells that you've just naturally got from leveling up and from your talents, I don't think Frost is going to be as far behind as it was in Phase 1. I'm not saying it's going to beat Fire, because I still think Fire will probably pull ahead, but I think Frost will actually be able to keep up now to the point where you could happily have Frost as your main spec because you really enjoy PvPing, but not feel too punished in PvE. I mean, we'll have to wait and see about that, but that is my guess. So as for the new runes, we'll start with a waste first. So we've got Frostfire Bolt, which launches a bolt of Frostfire at the enemy, and it does Frostfire damage. So not only does it slow the movement speed by 40%, but it also causes an additional X amount of Frostfire damage over 9 seconds. So this spell will be checked against the lower of the target's Frost and Fire resists, and counts as both Frost and Fire damage. Next up, we've got Hot Streak, and this is what I was talking about in conjunction with Combustion, as in the last talent point in Fire. Anytime you score 2 non-periodic spell critical strikes in a row using Fireball, Fire Blast, Scorch or Living Bomb, your next Pyroblast spell within 10 seconds will be instant cast. So when you pop Combustion, it's increasing your chance to crit, so you're waiting to get 2 crits back to back, instant Pyroblast. I mean, Fire, I do think is going to be really, really fun to play in the next phase, and Hot Streak plays a big part to that for me. Next up is Missile Barrage, and I really like Missile Barrage because being able to use abilities for free, which deal arcane damage, so you get free healing essentially, is going to be awesome. So this gives your Arcane Blast a 40% chance, and your Fireball and Frostbolt spells a 20% chance to reduce the channel duration of your next arcane missile spell by 50%. But it also reduces the mana cost by 100%. Lovely. And missiles will fire every half a second. And I think this is really going to help out mage healing, like massively, if you're healing as arcane. But the next one is Spellfrost Bolt. So this launches a bolt of Spellfrost at the enemy, causing X amount of Spellfrost damage and slowing movement speed by 40%. Now this spell will be checked against the lower of the target's Frost and Arcane resists, and counts as both Frost and Arcane damage. Now the thing that's interesting about this again is how it will synergize with another rune on your boots, but essentially you could spec Frost, and this is what I was getting at, and you could use Spellfrost Bolt as your primary way to heal your beacon targets, because it's going to do Arcane damage, which is going to heal, but it's also going to benefit from all your Frost talents. And when we look at the Frost talents just gain far more in the way of doing extra damage. So the critical strike damage bonus of your Frost spells, for example, increased by 100%. That's going to count towards your Spellfrost Bolt. Piercing Ice, which increases the damage, that's going to increase the damage of it by 6%. And of course, if you're using it on someone that's frozen, it's going to get 50% extra crit chance. So not only is it going to be useful in PvE, but it'd be useful in PvP as well, because you would be able to use this to self-heal as a Frost Mage. I'm excited to try this. And the reason I think it'll work is because of the first rune, which is Brain Freeze. So your Frost damage spells with chilling effects have a 15% chance to cause your next Fireball, Spellfrost Bolt, or Frostfire Bolt to be instant cast and cost no mana. So as long as Brain Freeze can proc off of Spellfrost Bolt, because it does have the 40% slow attached to it, you essentially could be doing free heals every time Brain Freeze procs, and it will cost no mana. The next boot rune will be Chronostatic Preservation. So this fuses Arcane Fire and Frost magic to freeze chronomantic energy into a stored state for later use. You can hold this energy for up to 15 seconds before it combusts and expires. When it's unleashed, you'll heal a friendly target. This spell's considered Arcane Fire and Frost for interactions with other spells, talents, and effects. Now, this is going to be a really interesting one to play about with, but ultimately you can store your healing that you essentially would be doing to people that maybe don't need it because they've got beacons on them, but they just don't need that extra healing. and then you're waiting until someone does, and boom, you can then unleash all that stored energy on someone for a big heal. I'm not sure how that's going to play out in comparison to something like Brain Freeze or even the next rune, which is Spell Power, because Spell Power is amazing, just increases critical strike damage bonus of all spells by 50%. That would be a tough choice. 50% extra crit damage bonus is going to just mean they hit harder, which is then going to heal harder, so it could be useful for both DPS and healing mages. They're the 6 runes that are on the belt and the boots, and these are the ones that I would say are nearly 100% going to be added in Phase 2. There are some that have been found on head and wrist, but I don't want to talk about that until we get confirmation closer to the time that it's not only the belt and boots that we're working with. Now, there's been tons of items data mined, from professions to STV PvP rewards to the loot in Gnomeregan. And rather than just sitting and going through all of them, because like the STV rings, they're really nice, but they're pretty boring. Let's be honest. It's just stamina, intellect, and then a school of spell power that you want. Instead, I want to look at the items that are really unique and powerful that might just make you want to play a mage. And the first one would have to be Defibrillating Staff. Now, this apparently comes from Gnomeregan. We have no idea which boss yet, but not only does it give stamina, intellect, and spirit, but it also increases healing done by spells and effects by up to 35, which is going to benefit your regeneration and mass regeneration, but it specifically increases damage done by arcane spells by up to 26. Now, the use effect on it, where you can sometimes bring someone back to life, I find a little bit strange, but still pretty cool. But the fact that it's specifically arcane damage will mean there's not going to be mass amounts of competition on this staff. I mean, yes, obviously a druid could use it, but I'd like to see this on mages first. There's also a really nice wand, and when I say really nice, it is absolutely amazing, because not only does it increase your damage and healing done by spells and effects by 9, but it's also arcane damage with a 1.5 speed. So there is actually another wand as well that gives 8 intellect, but that does fire damage. And as a healing mage, obviously, you're going to want arcane because it works towards your healing. But if you was a DPS mage, you might opt for the 8 intellect wand instead. And there's also a really nice trinket, which gives 6 intellect, some fire resistance, increases damage and healing done by 12, and on a 30-minute cooldown, it randomly channels between 1 and 150 health into between 1 and 150 mana every second for 10 seconds. So again, just another way of getting mana back is nice. It's a shame about the massive 30-minute cooldown, but it's better than nothing. Now, they're the only items I want to talk about when it comes to Mage from Gnomeregan and from PvP, because I think they're the only ones that are unique enough to warrant a mention. From professions, however, the tailoring head is absolutely amazing, and it doesn't look like there's any heads that are going to come from Gnomeregan, so your options are kind of limited. But the neuro-linked Arcanofilament Monocle, bloody hell, that was a mouthful, not only gives stamina and intellect and increases damage and healing by 22, it's also got 4 mana per 5 on, but the use effect on a 10-minute cooldown is awesome. It harnesses the latent arcane energy in the nearby air to give you charged inspiration, reducing the mana cost of all spells by 50% for 12 seconds. Now, right at the start of the video, I said mana was an issue in Phase 1, and it was for me at least. So like you can see, in Phase 2, you're going to get Mage Armor, you're going to get your Mana Gem, you're going to have a Trinket where you can get a bit more mana back, you're going to have a head that reduces the mana cost. There is lots of ways to keep your mana bar going if the Gnomeregan bosses happen to take a while to die and you're finding yourself struggling without having evocation. So overall, in terms of new abilities, talents, runes, new items, Mage is looking pretty good. And finally, how do I think it's going to perform? Well, in terms of casters in Phase 1, Mage has done really well, only to be really beaten out by the Warlock. And both Fire Mage and Arcane Mage are both above most of the other casters. Frost Mage is really, really low in comparison, but I do think they're going to see a bit of a rise in Phase 2. And like I said, if you want a spec that's just going to be able to do it all, I think Frost is going to be really good. Maybe it's not the most optimal way of healing. Maybe it's not the most optimal way of dealing damage in raids. Maybe I do think it's going to be the best for PvP though. But in one spec, you'll just be able to be competent at everything. So don't write Frost off. But in my opinion, I think Fire will be doing incredibly well. I think it will be up there in the top 1 or 2. I think possibly overtaking some of the physical damage dealers in Phase 2. On bursty fights where mana's not an issue, I think Arcane's going to do incredibly well as well. Like I said, I think we're going to see far more Frost Mages than we have in Phase 1. So ultimately, should you play a Mage in Phase 2? I personally think they're going to be one of the more fun classes to PvP on. I think they're going to hold their own in PvE, and solo farming with the toolkit that you're going to have now as Frost, I think they're going to be unrivaled. So yeah, I think Mage is in a really good place. If you enjoyed the video, like I say, before you go anywhere, subscribe to the channel and like the video and drop a comment, even if it's just to say, rubbish video, bruv. I don't really care. As long as it's a comment, drop a comment. And I'm going to go and start on the next class. See you on the next one.